Good morning et bienvenue, l'honorable sénatrice Bernadette Clement, Inspector Veronica Fox, Miss Nonso Morah, students, teachers, faculty, and guests. Welcome to the Prince of Wales Secondary School Black History Month panel discussion. My name is Ayan Taraj, and I'm a grade 11 student and one of the co-organizers of today's event, along with my classmates Kai Martland and Ryan Lee. Before we begin today, we'd like to acknowledge that we are joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations peoples. We are extremely fortunate to be gathering on these lands, and it is our responsibility to acknowledge these lands and commit to doing better towards reconciliation. Black History Month is a month-long observance held every February to honor, remember, and celebrate the people and events that have shaped Canada and the world. Black History Month is an opportunity to educate society about the history of Black Canadians, including their struggles, triumphs, and contributions to Canadian society. It is also a time to reflect on the ongoing fight for social justice and equality, and to recognize the resilience and strength of the Black community. Today, we are so fortunate to be joined by three extremely prominent Black Canadians who have made incredible strides in their respective professions and who have paved the way for those who will follow in their footsteps. I personally am super excited for today's panel. It has been a pleasure working with our speakers, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Senatrice Clement, Inspector Fox, and Ms. Morah. Our theme for today's panel is Black Canadian Trailblazers, defining their own future and paving the way for the next generation. The format of today's panel will be the following. The first 40 minutes of this event will be a guided discussion led by questions from your moderators. And then, in order to accommodate for today's school schedule, the last 20 minutes will be a question and answer session where we encourage you to send your questions through the chat. Before we begin, Ryan will introduce our amazing panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ayan. So yeah, before we go any further, I'd just like to take some time to introduce our three panelists that we have today. So in no particular order, first off is the Honourable Senator Bernadette Clement, who was appointed to the Senate of Canada in June of 2021 and a member of the Independent Senators Group as a lawyer and a politician. She also served as Mayor of Cornwall, Ontario from 2018 to 2021, being the first Black woman to serve as a mayor in Ontario. Wow, what a big accomplishment. Senator Clement is extremely active in her community, serving as a co-chair of the Race Equity Advisory Committee for the Association of Community Legal Clinics of Ontario, a member and chair of the Maison Baldwin House, a women's shelter, and much more. Welcome, Senator Clement. Our next panelist is RCMP Inspector Veronica Fox. Inspector Fox is an academic practitioner with over 20 years of experience in policing and public safety. Inspector Fox became a member of the RCMP in 2006. As a regular member in the RCMP, Inspector Fox has experience in frontline policing, youth investigations, project management, and information management and technology. Presently, Inspector Fox is the executive officer to the commanding officer of the BC RCMP, and she has several years of experience as a lecturer and professor, and she currently serves on the editorial board for an international academic journal, Salus Journal. She's honored to have been named 2022 International Alumni of the Year by her alma mater, Charles Sturt University, and thank you so much for joining us today, Inspector Fox. And last but not least, our final panelist is Ms. Nonso Morah, a second-year student at the University of Ottawa, majoring in conflict studies and human rights with a minor in creative writing. Additionally, she's a parliamentary assistant for Senator Paula Simons and the mentorship and program coordinator for the 1834 Fellowship. Hailing from Spruce Grove, Alberta, she's a dedicated advocate in her community as a poet, photographer, youth educator, and public speaker. Her creative work focuses on the themes of identity, transformation, and social change as it observes the minuscule details of life we unknowingly miss in a world filled with disinformation and distraction. Her prize-winning piece, When I Tell You I Love You, won first place at the 2022 Ottawa Spoken in the City Slam competition. She has performed across Ottawa and Toronto for various organizations, including the Government of Canada, Project Agape, and Carleton University. Senator Clement, Inspector Fox, and Ms. Morah, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so fortunate to have all of you with us.
Thank you very much, Ryan. With that, we'd like to begin today's panel with a couple of discussion questions. So our first question is, can you please share your upbringing and your trajectory that helped you land to where you are today? We'll start with Senatrice Clement.
Sure. For me, Black History Month starts with my pop, my dad, and he celebrated his 101 birthday last week. He is from Trinidad and Tobago, from the Caribbean, and he came to Canada decades ago to go to university and become a teacher. So when I think of Black History Month, I always think of him first. He married my mom, une Franco-Manitobaine. So a Black man marrying a white woman back in the 60s was a courageous thing for both of them to do. My maternal grandparents did not attend that wedding. So they started off without the support that you would expect, right? When you're starting off as a couple. We came together as a family later, and both the white side and the Black side came together nicely, but they were brave in their relationship. And I grew up, you know, in a loving household, but as soon as I stepped out of my house, it was different. I looked different. I always had to face the same question. Where are you from? Where are you from? Where were you born? I was born in Montreal, but I didn't look like everybody else. And so when my brother and my sister and myself were outside of the house, we felt different, and we were made to feel different. But we always had great parental love and support. So that was the stuff that kept us together and that helped us to, you know, weather some of the difficulties when we were in the schoolyard, or when I went to law school and I was one of only 2 Black law students. You know, it's been a lonely place. And then becoming the first Black woman mayor in Ontario in 2018 was the most amazing thing ever. But again, a very lonely place. A very lonely place. And now as senator, I'm part of an African Canadian senators group. So there are 8 of us in the Senate, so I'm not as lonely, but there's still a lot of work to be done. When I'm in committee, when I'm in different spaces, I'm still often the only Black woman in that space, or the only Black person, the person of color. And so there is a pressure, you know, when you are the first, there's a big pressure to be the best, to not make mistakes, because you want to make sure that the next generation, that the Nonso Morahs of the world will look at you and say, oh, she's doing okay, and I can do the same thing. So it's a great honor to be a trailblazer, but there's also a lot of pressure around that. But yeah, Black History Month for me is about my pop.
Thank you very much, Senator. Inspector Fox, can you go next? Or should I say Dr. Fox?
You can call me Veronica if you want. So really honored to be part of this discussion, especially when I look at the company that I'm in with my fellow panelists, both of you. So, you know, my childhood and upbringing, it's been, I've shared this quite a bit with, I've been asked to share this story quite a bit with the RCMP. It wasn't the best. I was born and raised in the Lower Mainland here in Burnaby, grew up my whole life in Burnaby in the 80s. And my parents, my dad's the one who's Caucasian white guy, and my mom is from Montreal, Black. Her father came, he was from Barbados, or our ancestry is from Barbados, and then further back to the mainland of Africa. We've actually I've done some work to sort of dig into that part of the past. I'm not done yet, but the story there was the British were actually recruiting out of the colonies or the islands, and were trying to get people to come and fight for them in World War II. So they sent the Canadians down, and so my grandfather apparently was like approached by some people in the street, or they had a stall set up or something, and they'd had some family challenges. They just lost some twins who had died in infancy, and so he was like, yeah, I guess so. I guess I'll go fight Hitler, was what they said. So he came back to his wife and said, see you later. And then all these guys got onto a boat, and then they went off they did their training in Montreal and then Canada, and then shipped out. And when they got back, he had a house there. So he called for his wife, having settled in this war house. And she got onto a boat, and they didn't have planes or for like intertransnational flights, right? So like she got into a boat, traveled for a whole while, was seasick the entire time, absolutely hated it, got off the boat, got onto a train, gets off the train in Montreal where my parent, he picks her up, into several feet of snow and just says, I want to go back. But she survived. She made a life there. And after a while, they sent for the three who were the three children that had been born and raised in Barbados. And my mom was the last one born in Canada. And she's the only one that was born Canadian. So we from there, my mom became into a nurse, went into nursing school, decided to start a new life, went to Regina, met my dad at a Bible study. And 6 months later, they were engaged, and a year after, like a year total, they were married. And then they came out west. So my childhood growing up here was very different. There were very few Black people. There were so few that you would actually do the nod when you passed one on the street. If you met another person, you saw another person you didn't actually know. And then that sort of stopped probably in the mid 90s. But it was just my brother and I. And my brother had disabilities, some trauma from childbirth, and one of the challenges I firmly believe the lack of healthcare that Black people get, or challenges that we have with that. That's the reason why my brother had disabilities. So that was a challenge, and my parents paved the way for a lot of people with disabilities to be in classrooms with everybody, to not be segregated. They refused to send Josh to a segregated preschool. And all of that. And I remember being very young and sitting in these government offices while my parents argued for healthcare for my brother, or respite. And I was coloring, but I remember all these meetings. And then I found out later who these people were that they were arguing with, people in the government. So I think that's really given me, that really shaped my life. In terms of wanting to advocate for people, and for social justice. And then there's the piece about the experience that I had in the schools, which wasn't very good. It was quite bad. I was beat up a number of times. I was assaulted by fellow students. I had teachers that basically they just chose not to acknowledge it. There were some that did that. There were others that just didn't care. And so my early interactions with the police were somewhat, I wouldn't say positive. You never had positive experience when you're dealing with the police, but obviously, but it was as a victim. It wasn't as somebody that was getting stopped in the streets or whatnot. It was because my parents called the police and they came to help. And so that really changed how I focused. And I guess the last piece of my childhood that really influenced my it's what the senator said earlier about not being you're often the only person in the room, and people are looking at you. And so be good, be better. And so that really pushed me. My mom had that conversation with me, and she told me, you're gonna do well. I wanted to give up at one point, and she's like, no, you have the potential to be an A student. You will be an A student, and you will get scholarships, and you will do this, and you will do that. And so when I walked out of my undergrad, I was like, oh, I'm done. But now, then I just was drawn back to it. So then I went back for more school and more school. And so I think that's really impacted how I am as a person, and my personality and my outreach.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Inspector Fox. Ms. Morah, would you like to be next?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Nonso Morah. I am currently a student at the University of Alberta. I'm in University of Ottawa. I'm from Alberta though. I was born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, in a little town called Spruce Grove, which is where I was raised, but I was born in Millwoods, which is inner city Edmonton. My parents moved us out there when I was 5 after my dad got a really good deal on some plot of land. We were only supposed to stay there for 2 years, somehow ended up being there for 14. So I grew up out in rural Alberta, which is a different story, I must say. I grew up being the only one in the room, and it's quite sad to say, hearing from my other panelists, that this was a reality for them. And funny enough, it's still a reality for many of us now, being someone who was raised in a small town in Alberta. When I got into grade 11, which is not actually that long ago, it was when COVID hit, and it was very shocking to me because I'd been so used to being outgoing, doing so much. I think a lot of you have a lot of extracurricular backgrounds. You're an AP, IB, everything. I was one of those kids, AP, IB. I was a competitive athlete. I was doing so much, and the world halted. It was a very scary time. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with my life. I didn't get any tape. I didn't get anything for university ball. I was freaking out. I wasn't sure what was going on. So that period of time really forced me to step outside of myself and find other outlets I can put myself into. And I thankfully got into a program that was started at the University of Alberta called the Black Youth Leadership and Mentorship Program. And that actually got me the opportunity to research with a professor who worked in the political science department there. And through that apprenticeship and learning from there, I really found that I had a love for understanding policy and politics a bit. I'd always been a vocal person. I was a kid who told everyone when I was 7 that I was going to be a lawyer. I watched a lot of Law and Order, still do. So I kind of had that in my head, like I was going to do criminal law. I was, going to either do international human rights law. Like I had it very much certain, but when COVID came, I wasn't sure what was going to happen with myself. So that opportunity gave me a bit of a stepping stone to kind of expand in my idea of, being young and getting thrown off course very suddenly. Through that program, I met someone who had been a page, and I don't know if they have the page. I think they have the page program in BC too, but they have a page program in every province. But there was someone I was working with who worked in the federal page program. So she was a Senate page. I met another girl who was a House of Commons page, and they kept being like, you would be great for this. Like you're right period of time, like you should try and apply. And I was like, why would I move to Ottawa? I could stay here. I could go to BC. I was going to go to UBC. I was going to apply to U of T, like all these places. But they're like, you want to work in politics. If you want to work in international human rights law, like you might as well go to the source of where all these people make the decisions. So I was like, you know what? What am I doing? I'm at home by myself. I might as well just apply and see what happens. So I applied for both and got in, which is very shocking. And through that, I was kind of able to go to my parents and be like, hey, yeah, so I know I'm your only daughter and I know I'm the oldest child here, but I'm going to dip. I'm going to go and see if I can travel and try something else. And my parents were super supportive. They have been the entire time. So they're like, you know what, like if this is what you want to do, we will support you on that journey. So I decided to go to the Senate page program. Led me to an entire new city, 5,000 kilometers away from my family. It was very scary. It's very hard to start. I know a lot of you may be in grade 11, grade 12 thinking about this. It is difficult, but it gets better, I promise you. So I got to the Senate page program and I did a year there and really loved just being on the Hill. I got to meet so many people. I built a network and also started working with a nonprofit called Operation Black Vote Canada, which centers on connecting more politicians, Black politicians into politics, because there aren't many. You'd be surprised when you get on the Hill. It's kind of shocking to meet people. Like we still do the not in Parliament precinct. Like if I see Clement, I'm like, hey, how are you doing? And like I'm an average staffer. And it's just because there aren't many of us on the Hill. So when you start walking around, you kind of meet people slowly. But it kind of opened doors for me to see what was lacking and that I wanted to be more of a part of it. So working with Operation Black Vote Canada, I was the coordinator with a fellowship program called the 1834 Fellowship, which is sourced more towards youth. And from there, I was a fellow first and then became a coordinator, and I still am a coordinator. And then through university and learning more about myself and exploring, I started to share a lot of my writing more, which is poetry, and got really good at it and really well known about it. And that kind of opened the door for a lot of creative outlets for me in Ottawa, a city I have no familial connection to. And yeah, from there, I left the page program and started working with a senator, and everything has kind of worked around there. School is still present, it's still hard, but there's a lot of other outlets you get through that. And I've learned a lot more about myself and how I can be an impact on the Hill, especially in the way it lacks a lot of the BIPOC community. So that's a bit about me.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all those. All three of your stories are super inspiring, and like, yeah, we definitely appreciate you guys just sharing a little bit about yourselves. So I know that we've already read your impressive bios, but we thought it'd be maybe a good idea to give you all the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about yourselves. So maybe like some of your greatest accomplishments, you guys kind of already talked about that in your things, but maybe things that you might be most proud of as well, something along those lines, just to let us get to know you guys a bit better as well. I guess we can have Ms. Morah go first.
Okay, my accomplishments. So yeah, it's so hard, I think, being a student and talking about yourself and your accomplishments and stuff you've done, because in my head, I'm like, I'm with a senator and an inspector. Like, what have I done that is equivalent to being the mayor of Cornwall? But in my head, I think every little thing is very big. Well, I think one of the biggest things, I think, coming out of high school was really trying to check off the list of things that I've always wanted to do. I was able to get valedictorian in a place where they never actually had a Black valedictorian. So I was the first Black valedictorian ever of my high school, which is crazy because that high school's been there for years. So that was a really big milestone for me. And then when I left, I was able to take that and kind of go to school. And at times when you become a first year student, you feel the need to have to do everything well and join every club and do everything so fast and, you know, get all those accreditations and be the best in your class and be best friends with your professors. Guys, it's not like that. So in my head, I kind of took a step back that year in school and really focused on just centering myself and my job, my new employment. And from there, things kind of started rolling in. So when it came to working on the Hill, I kind of got known through the networking. Working with the 1834 Fellowship was a really great accomplishment because I got to connect and network with a lot of prominent people I wouldn't have had the opportunity to connect with, especially from Spruce Grove. Like, it's a bit of a shut door on different sides from the west to the east of the coast. So moving was a very big experience to me. But after, through my poetry work, I got a lot of accreditation there. I won a couple slam competitions, which was really super cool. I never thought I'd be able to do that or even perform in public in the first place. And then I was able to kind of take that and share it with more people. And I was able to perform pieces for various organizations. That I also got to work at the National Art Gallery and perform there, perform at my university, Carleton University. I performed in Toronto for a couple of people, got to perform at the Senate of Canada for their Black History Month reception. And that really opened a lot of doors. I have a couple performances coming up for various private and public organizations that I didn't even know I get to talk to or even know about. When it comes to school, having these extracurriculars really helps push me forward. I recently won the RBC Future Launch Scholarship, so I got my school covered. So that's super cool, and that has really helped a lot of things forward too.
I don't know about you, but I'd categorize those as big accomplishments before.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess going next, the next piece, Clement, would you like to go next?
Sure. Big accomplishments. I think becoming the mayor of Cornwall was a big deal. And I'm sitting in my home office in Cornwall because the Senate is not sitting this week. There's a break week. And so I'm sitting in Cornwall on the traditional territory of the Mohawk and Haudenosaunee people. And when I ran for mayor in 2018, I was told, you know, don't talk about the fact that you might become the first woman mayor of Cornwall or the first woman Black mayor of Ontario. Just have a regular campaign. So I followed that advice. And I talked about taxes and snow removal and goose poop in the park and infrastructure and the environment, but it didn't talk about the fact that I could be the first. But every time I knocked on a door and a little girl answered, or her mom or a woman answered, they were connecting, right? They were saying to me, you might be the first. And we are watching that. We're invested in that. And the night of the election, when I was elected, all of the media showed up. CTV, Radio-Canada, CBC, all the mics were there and they were in my face and they were going, how does it feel to be the first? And I guess for me, for the people of Cornwall, they knew me, right? I had been in Cornwall for years. I had volunteered. I had been a legal aid lawyer for decades. And they were like, well, we just elected Bernadette. But for little girls and women, it was a big deal. One little girl, and I tell this story because I have her permission to do so, she helped me during my campaign. She was the little sister of a friend. And I remember helping me put up signs and hand out pamphlets. And one day she was sitting in the backseat of the car and she pulled on my hair. And she said, you know, one day I'm going to run for mayor too. And she looks like me. She has brown skin, curly hair. And she said that with so much confidence that I didn't have when I was her age. So, I mean, the reason I do this is because of Jersey, because of Nonso, you know. I'm inspired by people like Inspector Fox, who can talk so personally about their experiences and bring that to the job. And then when I was mayor during a pandemic, well, that was, you know, a moment. You will all remember the murder of George Floyd. And for me personally, as a Black person, that was a time for me to say, okay, I'm going to take up more space. in all of these places that I occupy on my own, often, I will take up more space. And so I talk more openly about, what it means to be a Black person, what it means to watch the murder of George Floyd, what you learn from that. And when I was the mayor, I marched in a Black Lives Matter protest, and I was criticized for it severely because it was a pandemic. I was out with 1,000 people, but I had to be able to explain that it was important for me as a Black woman, as a person that's a mayor for everyone in Cornwall, but who also as a Black person has to show up at moments that matter because of who I am and because of the people that I represent, not just everyone, but sometimes even more so, young girls, young Black kids. That's important. So those are big moments for me in my life.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And last but not least, Inspector Fox.
So I've been listening to, I'm thankful to be going last because these are the types of questions that I kind of dread the most. My personality has always been such that I just sort of, for me, an accomplishment is something that I push for and can achieve by putting in enough work. So when you ask about my favorite or my most treasured accomplishments, I'll tell you it's going to school and getting my doctorate is one. It's not getting awarded, but although I think it's important that we are awarding people for some of the work that they do, that's just as important. I have a hard time though speaking out and telling my own story, and that's something that a mentor that I've recently engaged with has sort of told me I need to start doing. And it's definitely a challenge for sure. So that taking up more space, I absolutely agree. I think one of the best accomplishments that I've been able to achieve has been my current job. That day, so it was we have the commanding officers in charge of the entire province. So prior to one we have now, we had a lady, and she knew somebody who knew me, and they had a vacancy in this position. And so they asked me if I would, sort of have an interview and go for it. And I'm so thankful that I did. I never would have, I have all these moments where I go, I can't believe I'm talking to a senator. I can't believe I'm on a panel with a poet. And that was one of those days. I had an email from the commanding officer in my inbox, and I was like, oh, and so I called up my friend and I said, what did you do? And he's like, no, you just got to go with it. Right. So I did my interview, and I was asked to act in the position. I didn't have the rank at the time, so it was a sergeant. And that was incredible. It was like, basically I was suddenly in the room where it happens. And it wasn't just, I mean, that has allowed me to do a lot more. And of course, right when I got that position, COVID happened, George Floyd. And all of a sudden, all these eyes from national headquarters and here were looking at me, and they wanted me to speak about it. And there was a few other people, I have some connections and stuff. So I was able to put some things forward and have those hard conversations. And I think being in the room where it happens is really what has made me be able to do good things for this organization, and I hope for the Black community as well. I am shocked. I am, amazed that I have these conversations with these young people because I've got 15 years, or actually, so sorry, 17. That's 17 years now, but it still feels like I've got 5. And so I have these conversations with these constables, and then I realize I'll have a moment where I'm talking to them and I'm like, oh, they're looking up to me. I have to tell them what to do. And I don't mean like operational, I mean like, career advice and just all of that. So I find that very overwhelming. But I am thankful that I can be in these conversations. They let me do a lot of special committee work. And so I've had a conversation, or I've had a piece in the special committee on reforming the Police Act. I've had a piece in body worn cameras, which are all related to all of this stuff. And I find that I'm humbled, but also honored to be in those types of roles.
Thank you all so much for sharing your stories. They're really impressive and really offer us a lot of insight into the future as well. And so our next question is, what role do you think education specifically plays in promoting Black excellence and highlighting history? And how can we better incorporate these subjects into our school curriculums? We can start with Senator Clement.
It's funny, I was just with high school students this morning at École Héritage here in Cornwall in person. It was really great too. So it's everything. it's everything. I mean, I guess the thing I'd like to say is that we need to celebrate Black History Month, not just in February, but we need to incorporate how important it is to lean into your identity, lean into your heritage, because it's a source of strength. I can tell you it's a source of my mental health, like knowing who I am, where I'm from, being proud of that, and having that celebrated by not just Black people, but by Canadians in general is very helpful to me personally. And I need to talk about that to students at whatever age. I speak to grade school students as well, and high school students. I speak to university students. So every education is at the center of it all. And I think it's not just about Black history is Canadian history. And so we have to talk about all of our different histories. We have to talk about how to be an ally. I need allies in my life as a Black politician. I need white allies and Indigenous allies. And so part of Black history is also talking about our stories and talking about what we need in our community to be able to move forward. We need respect and we need solidarity, but we need allies. And so when I speak to kids, and when we are speaking to teachers and through classrooms, we're talking about reaching out, celebrating our history, but also saying, hey, we still need help because we still need a lot. There's a lot of work to be done around systemic racism, around poverty issues, around access to healthcare, like Inspector Fox was talking about. Black students. It's true what Nonso is saying. Nonso and I will do the head nod on the Senate because there's not many of us, and it's 2023. So it's all about education. It's everything.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I totally fully agree with that. And next, can we ask Inspector Fox, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that education is the key. It needs to be in our schools. I'm very lucky because my mom had me read certain books when I was young. She had me watch certain movies when I was young. And she basically built that a culture into me because there was nobody else to talk to. There was no one here. And certainly not in my schools. And they certainly weren't going to be teaching that. The only thing they ever talked about was a brief snippet about slavery. And yet we know that the Black community, like worldwide, has contributed to the world economy, to our history, and it's important that we talk about those things. Last week, I was on a special. I zoomed into a city of Surrey here, did a special on Black history in Canada, or sorry, in Vancouver, and all we ever hear normally about here is Hogan's Alley, sorry, but he was really impressed. He had all this history that he's sort of dug up that has a lot more than that talks a lot more than just Joe Forte or just that section. We've been here quite a while, so I think it's really important that we celebrate those. We can't let that be forgotten. We need to celebrate it. We need to work it into our curriculum, and we need people not to be in the school system thinking either that we didn't contribute to Canada, or that we should be ashamed of our history, or that we are somehow lucky that we're here, as we're all lucky, right? We should all understand that we're all lucky, but that we're somehow less than. I think that education has, so that's bringing Black history in. I think I'm going to speak to education in general. I think a fulsome, large, broad scope education is going to open people up and help them learn about a large scope of things, not just Black history. I'll give you an example. So my organization has it started out in Halifax. We call it H Division. And it's called the Black African Canadian Workshop. So ACE, it's the ACE course. My ally, the supervisor here, sent me, I was asked to go to this course in Halifax, and he was new in the job. And so I asked him, and he was like, yeah, absolutely, you're going to go to this course. I went out to that course. It's developed by RCMP officers, Craig Smith being one. He started this course, and I learned things. I thought I knew the Black experience in Canada. I learned things on that course. And so I think that that education piece is really important. And the more people can travel, I learned things about the Black experience just being in the community, and I'll spare you the details, but what I experienced in the community in Halifax compared to what I experienced here in BC. And I know that, you know, for those of you that are elsewhere, you know, your experience is different in Toronto or Ottawa. And so I think that's really important, and we should really encourage our youth specifically, but all of us to sort of try and get that broad scope experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. And now I guess for a more recent insight, can we ask Ms. Morah, please?
Yeah, this is like a topic that really just gets to me because I am going to speak from the perspective of a student. So I grew up in rural Alberta. I love my high school. I love many people in my high school, but the one thing we lacked were people like me. I think I went to kindergarten up to grade 12 with the same 3 Black kids, and we graduated together. It was amazing. We were like a crew, and it was me. And then like after that was their siblings and my siblings. So we really held the place together. And the scariest thing was growing up, there was a lot I didn't know. And in grade 11 and grade 12 was when I kind of did that internal research of myself. And I said, you know, I'm going to go and find out more about who I am and what I want to do with this space. And through that knowledge, I got connected to a professor named Dr. Jennifer Kelly. She's actually currently based in BC right now, but she was from the University of Alberta. And her entire profession was really just to dissect what history is telling us is wrong, what our education system is lacking, and what have Black people actually done to this country that has been erased from history. Through her work, she was able to bring up the work and background of Dr. John Ware, who was actually the first Canadian, like first Black Canadian cowboy. He was there, before we became a province in 1905. He was actually someone who came to Alberta, built his land, developed his cattle feeds, and he finally got commemorated a couple years ago. I think it was 2017 or 2018 for his work, but no one knew about him. She brought up the insights of Amber Valley, which was an entire Black community in Alberta that was erased out of history. And now I think it's in between Calgary and Edmonton right now. And her whole work was just kind of going back in time and telling us what isn't shown in our education. It was very timely because at that time I was graduating and the Alberta government did a whole revise of curriculum that was just didn't sit well with anybody. So her work was a really big thing because a lot of teachers are really trying to source out true information. As a student, I must say, because we are all at an age now where we do not only depend on the teachings of our parents and our schools, we have a lot of access to information. It's sad to say, but it is now our time to go out and get that information because curriculum just isn't at a point, and a lot of the people who are building curriculum aren't people who have the same connection with all the ideas that we have. A lot of them are older, a lot of young voices aren't there, and being someone from Alberta where the diversity level was pretty low in the regions I'm in, and I'm not sure exactly where in BC, but your school diversity may not be up to par with a lot of Black history themes that currently exist if you look at like who we have speaking. So it's very important that you do the research, and you do not need to be Black to only do this research. It's a requirement, I think, of everybody to really take time to find what history is. I think teachers and schoolings really rely on American history to be the foundation of what Black identity is in Canada. And I must say that we're at a point where that is no longer acceptable. Martin Luther King did a lot of great things. So did Rosa Parks, but we're forgetting about Viola Desmond. We're forgetting about Portia White. We're forgetting about Corey Besk, Oscar Peterson, the sleeping car porters who really did a lot to move stuff forward. The Colored Black Hockey League, which was in Maritimes, really created what the hockey league is for us. And places like Little Burgundy, which was like the Harlem of Quebec, which was an amazing place. Rockhead's Paradise was the biggest jazz center of Montreal, where you had people like Nina Simone, you had Oscar Peterson, you had performers from all across the world coming to Montreal, Black Canadians coming to a space that was like curated by Black artists and by Black communities and pushing forward these ideas that just have not been shared. And it's crazy because these are people that I learned about this year. Like a lot of people on this list I didn't know about. And I'm sad to say I didn't know about it, being someone who really just pride myself on, you know, being a part of a community. And I also want to highlight the fact that like the Black community is not only that which was born and raised with Canadian ancestry. I am a second generation immigrant immigrant from Nigeria. I know exactly where I'm from. I just got off the call with my grandma right now, who is chatting to me about the elections in Nigeria. That history is Canadian history, and you should not let anyone deny you of that information. So as students, as teachers, whoever on this call, I beg of you and request of you to, after this panel and this conference here, take the time to like bring forward these ideas to your student. You guys write about it, read about it. It's there, it's present. It's far more interesting than a lot of stuff they're sharing, because there is more than slavery. Like, my family was personally not affected by slavery, I must say. Like, I know exactly when my great-great-great-grandfather climbed up the coconut tree, cut down the stuff. I know those stories because we weren't a part of slavery in that sense. So it was interesting to me when we're in Alberta and people are feeding us the stories of slavery and looking at me expecting my opinion. And I'm like, personally, I don't know what happened. I don't know. I can't say I do know, because that is not my history. That is not my ancestry. That is not my story. And I think we make mistakes by expecting Black students to be able to share this work and share these ideas, because it's not our job. It's not the job of Black students. It's not the job of BIPOC students to be educating their classmates, to be educating the people around them. It is the job of the people above us to bring those stories down to us. And when we depend on Black students to tell these stories, you are alternatively alienating them from their own histories and their own identities, because you're putting them in a role of educator when many of us aren't ready for it. I wasn't ready to be an educator. Now I am. But when I was first enlisted to do this, I was having kids look at me when we're reading the Underground Railroad, and I'm like, I don't know anything about the Underground Railroad. I know about the best places to hang out in Lagos and Abuja, but I can't tell you anything about the Underground Railroad, right? So I really do think when we talk about education, we need to target our education in Canada to first Canada, and we need to first be honest about what we have and have not done as Canadians in our history. And we need to allow BIPOC students to claim their history within Canada without alienating it or separating it from true Canadian history. I hate even saying Black Canadian. It's just Canadian history, and that's what it should be, and that's what it's always been. So anyway, that's my insight, and I do appreciate that question because it matters so much to me.
Thank you so much for your response, Ms. Morah, and thank you very much, Inspector Fox and Senatrice Clement. So our next question is kind of a follow-up to that question. We know education plays a really important role, but for all of the students who are joining us, what kind of advice would you give to them in order to further celebrate and promote Black history? Perhaps Senatrice Clement, you might want to start us off with this one.
You know, I don't know. I think there has to be some joy and love in all of this, you know. Yeah, we have to talk about the serious stuff. We have to talk about systemic racism. We have to talk about the fact that, you know, there's overrepresentation of Black people in our prison system, in our criminal justice system. You know, we have to talk about what's happening at Roxham Road. You know, there are asylum seekers coming into this country. There are people struggling and that will face struggles once they come here. So there's all sorts of things that we have to talk about. But there's also joy and love in Black communities. And so there's also celebration too. And I think it's trying to find that balance, that healthy balance between being serious and saying, okay, we need to do this. And there's so much work to be done, but also understanding that, you know, we love where we live. We love our families. I love to talk about music. I love to talk about Beyonce as much as I love to talk about, you know, I know Nonso is going to the concert. I can't believe she scored tickets and I didn't. But I think that we, you know, we're for Black History Month, we want to talk about all the things that we do and that are interesting to us. And we want other people to talk about our stories too, as we do the rest of the year. You know, I'm an ally in Indigenous communities, and I celebrate in the months and in the days where that is, you know, that we're called upon to do that. And I want people to celebrate our history as well. Yeah, so that's what Black History Month and Black History every day means to me.
Thank you so much, Senator. Inspector Fox, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I think you guys are obviously doing this today. And so I would applaud you for deciding to come up with a panel and putting it all together. I know you put a lot of work into this. So I think that I am honored by that. And I think that the larger community can be honored by that as well. And that's the other thing too, is it doesn't just have to be telling stories. It can be, I've been toying with the idea. My mother, for example, made a bunch of our old foods, right? This week I came home and she had made cuckoo and plantain, right? There's other ways you can share. You can learn a few recipes, have a multi-ethnic food experience at your school or anything like that. And I think that goes back to what the senator said. It's about celebrating. It's about enjoying, right? So there's a lot to be enjoyed.
Thank you, Inspector Fox. Ms. Morah, would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course. So I just think in terms of understanding Black history, I just want to say amazing job to you guys. I wish I was able to come up with as many people to do this in my high school experience, because you guys are doing something amazing. But ultimately, I really do believe that when you want to share and understand what Black history is, I think first you need to identify what is part of Black history and what isn't. I think media really shares and pushes a lot of stuff in. And as someone who is a part of a lot of popular cultural things, I'm young, I'm fresh, I'm hip like you guys. So trying to understand what information should be shared forward and resonate with Black history, and what you are entitled to as an ally to help push that forward. When it comes to looking at Black history and understanding what it is as someone who's trying to push forward stuff, I think information is the most important thing, and finding networks and people to communicate with as a whole is the greatest way to step into it. One thing I didn't have growing up was a very strong network of people that I can connect to and understand, and that can share information with me that I wasn't aware of, and that's in all realms. So, you know, creating and building a network of people, taking on initiatives, and sharing parts of history and parts of Black history that are also very important and are also good. I think a lot of times the Black history, Black cultural stuff gets a really bad rap on things. It's either about sadness and death and slavery, or like really dark, brutal things like, you know, the death of George Floyd. There is a lot in Black history that isn't just, you know, pop culture references and memes of Little Yachty dancing. He's great, but like still memes of Little Yachty dancing. There's way more to be shared of all of that. So I really do think it's important to tap into that. And also to be aware of Black history is not just US, Canada. Black history is beyond that. So look beyond the frontiers. Like Africa is a very beautiful continent. It's not intensely horrible and sad. It's a beautiful place with beautiful cultures, beautiful music, beautiful sounds. So like try and connect with stuff that aren't in tune with what we have here, because we are in an echo chamber that is beating upon us every day. And it's important to take a step beyond that and trying to listen to the news that goes beyond this frontier, because Black history is not just confined to the US and Canada. It is beyond, and a lot of people in this country come from beyond. So we owe it to them to learn more. So A, we're not ignorant of what we say, and B, we continue to be as honest and connected with the world as we can be as we grow in this very, very diverse world we have.
Maria, thank you so much for sharing all those. All three of you brought up like super valid points. And yeah, hopefully we'll see that implemented in our schools pretty soon. Looking at the time, it's around the time that we're going to start transitioning to our Q&A session. So for all of the students joining us, if you do have any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat and then we can cover them. In the meantime, while we wait for that, if the panelists have any questions for each other, feel free to go ahead. Or Ayan, if you want to go ahead too.
Yeah, if you have questions for each other, you can go for it. I also have a question that I was hoping to ask the three of you. I was curious as to how the three of you are celebrating Black History Month, particularly in your careers. So for Inspector Fox, within the RCMP, how is the RCMP celebrating Black History Month? And for Senatrice Clement and Ms. Nonso, how is the Senate of Canada celebrating Black History Month?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
So we have a like a national lens that we put on things sometimes. So national does their thing, and then we also have local. So nationally, we're doing a like a campaign. They have internal messages that came out, and we had one from the commissioner. We have ones from that come out on our external facing website. So you'll see some testimonials. I did one a few years ago. One of the things I'm really trying to do is not be the only voice. Like I acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege in my position, and so I need to use my voice as I should, but I also don't want to be the only person talking. I want other people to have their own lived experiences shared as well. So I've really tried to mentor a few other people to sort of step up locally. This year for celebration, last year we did there's a couple of us that did a big kind of a recruiting thing that I was really excited about. We did essentially a Black and African targeted recruiting thing, which happened on Zoom. We couldn't have it here because COVID kind of spooled up again we had to lock down, but that was really exciting. This year, I take full blame for this. I've been wrapped up in a number of different things, so it's sort of been a little bit here, a little bit there. But we do get together and try and advertise, or I was recently on a panel for new immigrants, particularly from areas of Africa, what the policing role is here in Canada, what your rights are, how police are to engage with you, how you might engage with the police, and how we're responsible to protect your rights. So that was really edifying experience. That was 2 weeks ago. I did that with one of my colleagues. A lot of what we do, my personal perspective is that I am not to wait around for my organization to celebrate for me. And yes, they do some things, but really the impetus is upon me to be that voice within, and they're to support me in that. And so I really try and take that approach.
Thank you so much for sharing, Inspector Fox. Either Senatrice Clement or Ms. Morah, if you'd like to go next.
So Black History Month for me, it always starts with my dad. So I saw him a lot this month. And so I had dinner with him and had him tell me about his history, right? His parents, his grandparents, his experience as a porter here in Canada, his experience as a teacher. Number two, schools. I am going to have visited more than 12 classes, probably closer to 15 to 18 classes. So that's hundreds and hundreds of students. And so that's always a priority. This morning I danced on stage with some local high school students here in Cornwall. And so that's important. Black History Month is also personal. You know, taking walks just by myself, listening to, I love rap music. I love Kendrick Lamar right now. I find his words are really powerful. Beyonce is a constant source of inspiration. So I think taking some time just for me to be quiet and to be listening to music. The Senate also had an art exhibit of Black artists in our Senate location. We had a reception where Ms. Nonso Morah, I mean, it was a mic drop moment where she did some spoken poetry that brought many of us to tears, because it was really about feeling right in your skin, feeling beautiful and strong and taking up space. And so it's been a really great Black History Month so far. And the three of you are amazing to organize this. I get to sit on a panel with Nonso and Inspector Fox. Come on. I'm done. Perfect Black History Month. 2023, done. Thank you.
I'll quickly hop on there. I'm not going to tell Senator Clement that I went to the Kendrick concert in BC in the summer. I'm not going to tell her that. But it's fine. We're not telling her that. It's okay. But in terms of, for me, how I celebrate Black History Month, I don't really celebrate Black History Month because I think my Black history is yearly. I kind of carry it with me, right? So I don't really, I mean, I call my mom way more, but I feel like in my head, I've been celebrating it through everything I do, from the work I write to the way I protest in school sometimes, to the things I tell my teachers. Like it goes with me, it follows me, it sleeps with me. Like my history is on me all day. But I think Black History Month has just given me a bit more of a platform, because I think more people are noticing what I do because it is in the forefront of their minds. So I just try and be a bit more vocal and, you know, speaking at panels or presenting my poetry and targeting it more to specific people, specific demographics. I think I'm far more vocal in how I walk, and I have a bit more of a confidence when I have a pep in my step, because I'm like, do not mess with me Black History Month, please. You know, it's not the time for that. But yeah, no, I think Black History Month, again, it's a beautiful concept, but in my head, Black history follows many of us throughout our entire life. It's the call from your parents, it's the goodbye to your grandma, it's everything. It's the moments that you go to bed and the moments when you wake up. When I'm searching for foundation, I remember my Black history, that's for sure. So in my head, it's something that I will never let go of. It's nice to have a month for it, even though it's the shortest month, but I will still claim what I have here and I will use it to make sure that everyone knows that it is a prominent part of many of our lives, and it's necessary for you to be just as aware as I am of this reality.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And I just want to say once again, if you guys have any questions for each other or any things that you'd like to touch upon now, we're probably going to start to wrap things up pretty soon. So if there's anything more you'd like to touch upon, by all means, go ahead.
I actually see a question inside the panel. I think there's one for me and then one for us in general. So I can answer the one for me really quickly. Describe my experience growing up in rural Edmonton and how has this environment changed or not changed for Black people in the past decade? So I will say growing up in Spruce Grove, which is Edmonton, was very interesting for me because I'm the oldest of three, but I also have two younger foster siblings. So technically right now I'm the oldest of five. And we moved there when it was still called a town and not a city. That tells you something. Like we went to the school and we moved to the school where it was there was only, I think we were the only Black kids in my school. So I grew up always having this spotlight on me. In my head, I had to do really well all the time because my little brothers I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me. He's in grade 12 now. I have another brother who's 5 years younger than me. He's in ninth grade. So there's a level of, I'm always aware of people watching me, and that was very scary and very hard. I think I had the most pressure on myself from grade 9 to 12. It was now I look back, I was like, you were doing a lot. I was doing a lot. And it's interesting that I'm far chiller now. Like my brother's like, you're like so chill. Like what happened? And I think it's just because I'm aware that I don't need to perform for anybody. It was very much so a performance growing up in Spruce Grove. Now, if we look at it now, I think it's still close to the same, like it's no longer a town, it's a city. And I do think, you know, my brothers still feel like sometimes they're not as close to people or they don't have the same backgrounds. It's still a very small Black population there. The only thing that's different though is that we have far more access, I think, to a lot of our family. We're very close with our family in Edmonton. I'm still there pretty frequently. I have a lot of friends there and my brothers do too. Also, we're athletes. So as basketball players, we're in this very big hub of people where it's like, you know, we're represented in that space. So that is a saving grace. But I do know that growing up, I look back and I think I felt like I was always being watched. So everything I did was I was very cautious. I was checking every box to make sure we were aware, making sure my parents knew I was doing the best I can because I know there's someone behind me. For the second question, is there a dream or hope you have for the future of Black people in Canada? Yeah, everything I've been saying, just from, you know, the education is so important to me because I feel like if I just gotten a bit more, I would have been far more confident in school. Like there was just so much that I couldn't say or do because I felt like no one would understand. And if that was presented in my education growing up, I honestly don't know who I'd be, but I'd be up there, you know? So yeah, that for sure, the change of education, more Black people and more BIPOC people on the Hill. Guys, we need you. If you're interested in governance, any of you guys students, I will give you my LinkedIn, I will give you my Instagram, whatever it is, please contact me. Because I really want to see more youth. And even if you're not BIPOC, like allies too, like we need you here because you'd be surprised what is here. So having more vocal young people on the Hill who actually have missions and goals that they want to implement with, like, you know, nothing attached is so important. I think sometimes I feel lonely here because I do feel like there are some spaces on the Hill where it's like, because I'm young, I'm not heard. And there's only certain people who will like give you the benefit. I know my boss is really amazing. She is very interested in, you know, connecting with young people. Clement goes out of her way to do that too. But a lot of senators and a lot of MPs don't do that because there is that separation from the average Joe that they have, and they kind of let it go to their heads. So it would be very amazing to have more young people on the Hill to push forward our ideas and give us a voice because we need it here. So those are kind of those two questions in one. Thank you.
I can take the one for me. So how has your ancestry impacted the way you approach your position in law enforcement? That's a huge question. And essentially it's so when I first started, remember, I didn't have any of that experience, the larger Black experience with policing. And so what I did know was that they were there for me when I had been assaulted. I also had my brother, one of his support workers' husband was a Mountie, and he was in Burnaby here. And so I remember being in Girl Guides and marching in the Remembrance Day parade, and he or standing and watching, and he walked by and winked at me, which you're not supposed to do, right? But it was like, you know, because I'd waved. And so I had nothing but positive experiences with police, and we do a lot of good in the community. And so it never even occurred to me that would be a thing. But what was interesting was when I did put in my application for the force, we had a number of friends by then, and people were asking my mom, like, how are you letting her do this? Like, you know, don't you, like, why? And, you know, etc. So that conversation was kind of the first time we had that conversation. Getting into the force, being part of the organization. I was the first person, I'm very sure the first person at Depot that they'd ever seen that had dreadlocks. So I had to go to the drill hall and get them approved, right? And so I mean, I was terrified, and I had some civilians that worked in the uniform and equipment that didn't have anything nice to say about that. But I'm proud to say that the Sergeant Major of Depot was absolutely fine with it, and I had no issues. And as I think what I want to say is that as much as people have had challenges, and I honor those experiences, one of the things that I think my job is, now that I've had some time to grow in this organization and take certain positions, is to be that face and be that voice in the organization that makes change. And there's not just me. I'm the fifth, the number 5 promoted female to inspector who made it to our commission ranks in Canada in all time. We're celebrating our 150th. And my point is, I don't want that to be the last. I want more. So I go and I look and I mentor people. I mentor all sorts of people, but particularly when I have those conversations with my Black colleagues who are lower in rank, I encourage them and tell them, if you want to make change, if you want to be the change, you have to be in the right positions. So you have to work hard to get there. And once you're there, don't forget about everybody else. You have to look for how this organization is going to move forward. And I want this organization to be, it's already a legacy. When I get into my uniform, my red serge, and every single time I put that uniform on, I feel pride. I am so proud of this outfit, this organization, but I know that I'm also responsible to make sure that it stays strong. It gets better than it was and is, and that it stays strong. And part of that is people like you young people coming in afterwards and moving us forward. So that's kind of that piece. I also have the privilege of having those conversations. So I speak the Black experience, but I also speak the police experience. And I had a lot of challenging conversations with some colleagues when George Floyd first started, because there was pushback and there was some conversations. And you know, it's really interesting because I've sort of realized, I've come to realize, and I tell them this, I say, you need to understand, you're offended. You're offended because people say police are terrible, because a couple police officers did some terrible things. You need to understand what it's like, and you feel judged. You need to know what that's like every single day of your life, to have everybody watching you, to have people looking at you with mistrust. This is the first time you're experiencing it, really, and through no fault of your own, because you're not part of that group that did these bad things, but this is the first time you're experiencing it. Just imagine what it's like to feel that all the time. And so I've actually managed to have some really positive experiences with some of these members that just never, they're good people. They've just never had this experience before. And that's part of my job as well. And the last question here was, what's your dream? My dream is for the day that we don't have to have those kind of conversations, the day that I'm not the only person in the room, and the day that I don't have to articulate that I deserve to be there. And I think we're getting there. And I think we're getting there in a lot of areas. And I'll say, not just for policing, for the universities, the professors, for, you know, politics, for our judges, for doctors, all of these sorts of things. We need to just be inclusive, and we need more people at the table. So the only way you can make the change is apply yourselves to your university, apply yourselves to whatever job you want, whatever career path you want. Not everyone's going to be a police officer. I get it. But if whatever stream you're going into, understand that you're the group that can make the change.
I'll be quick. I'll be very quick because I don't know if I have any time. I want to shout out to Senator Jaffer, a woman in politics and an inspiration to me. I want to shout out to former MP Jean Augustine. She is the one who made the motion in Parliament to start Black History Month in 1995 to have it recognized in this country. And she was the first Black woman elected to Parliament. So there are a lot of people who have come before us. And so I know we're going to be okay because all of those folks have been pushing forward, and we've just got to keep showing up. I can speak for politics. We just need more. I heard, Inspector Fox say more. We just need more. Politics is not this toxic thing that you think it is. Check out my TikTok and Insta and Facebook, please. I'm trying to keep, especially my TikTok, I'm trying to keep politics about love and about transparency and about just keep moving forward. And so whatever you choose to do in life, definitely please vote, definitely run for office, but just generally do things that you love to do things out of love, and we'll all get there. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Merci beaucoup. Nyawa to all of you.
And we want to say thank you all very much. On behalf of the students and teachers from Prince of Wales, we would like to thank you three amazing panelists for joining us today, for sharing your stories and providing us with meaningful advice and guidance. On behalf of the three of us, it was truly an honor and privilege to have you join us.
We also want to take a second to thank the members of our school community as well. So teachers, thank you so much for signing up your classes and bringing your students. Students, thank you for being attentive, being actively engaged, and for participating in the discussion and also asking any questions that you might have had. And last but not least, we'd also like to thank Mr. Lee for helping us organize this event and providing us guidance as well.
Thank you to all of you for joining today. We hope that this is just the beginning. Take what you learned here today and incorporate it in your daily lives. As many of our panelists said, and as the first Black federal cabinet minister, Jean Augustine, said, quote, Black history is not just for Black people. Black history is Canadian history, unquote. Be leaders and change makers, whether it's further educating yourselves, talking to your friends and family, or showing your support for Black history events like today. Thank you very much, and merci beaucoup.